Hello and welcome to the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast. In this second season of the show, host Jorden Guth is joined by a new guest each episode who knows something about hi-fi that Jorden doesn't. And who knows, while he's learning about all of this, you might learn something too. So with no further ado, here's Jorden and this week's guest.
Hello and welcome to the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast. Today we're here with Conradin Amft, the COO of T+A. Welcome, Conradin.
Jorden, good to be with you. Thanks for inviting me on.
Thanks for coming. There's a lot of kind of questions that I have about T+A, your involvement, and a whole bunch of other stuff that I would very much like to get into. To start, how did you originally get into hi-fi? Maybe a little bit of an origin story, I should say, to where you are now and how you got there.
Sure. I got into audio actually before I started working with T+A. And I was kind of at a crossroads at that point where I had finished my bachelor's degree. I had worked for a watchmaker, done some work in consulting, and the opportunity came up to work for a great company in the audio industry with whom I would say we are friends, who make amazing headphones, who are also German. I think you know who I'm talking about. And that was actually my first start because I had the opportunity to work for a family business, which they were at the time, and to also work in marketing, which I had discovered during my stint with watchmakers. And I found it incredibly interesting. And in hindsight, it's now kind of full circle that I went from a career potentially in academia to watchmaking, consulting, and then all the way back to the audio industry. I think it was more of coincidences at the time. But in the end, that is how I started working in the audio industry. And at that point, I started asking myself the question, how do I imagine my way into T+A? First of all, do I imagine a way into T+A? And secondly, how can I do that? And that was actually on a drive through our hometown. And you've been there, Jorden, where my now wife and I discussed it. And we then came up with the idea for my master's degree in family business and how that could be a great segue using my time at Sennheiser to segue into T+A.
Now, your father, Siegfried, was the founder of T+A.
Yes.
So you grew up in a hi-fi or an audiophile household to begin with. So I think that's also kind of a key part to this, where right from birth, essentially, you are always surrounded by the hi-fi influence.
Absolutely. Totally. I think the flip side is that it's kind of a normal.
Yep.
Because you're so used to it that for the past 30 years, I've always had the latest loudspeakers, headphones, now that we make them, electronics. And so it for me, it was always kind of the baseline to have that stuff around, which was great. And I think it really helped me form a connection with the company.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I in a very positive sense, I grew up at the company. And even at an early age in high school, I worked in the company, for example, in our production team or in our customer service team. And that was always a thing that it was very natural for me to work at T+A in some sort of capacity. And of course, as a student, you don't have that much of an impact. But for me, it always felt natural that T+A was there. It wasn't like I was completely removed and then all of a sudden at age 20-something, you decide to enter a world that you've never been to.
And I think it's also interesting because for people that don't know, T+A is still a very family-owned and family-driven business. So I think there's that parallel there where it's very much part of the DNA of T+A to have those long tenures, the relationship with the individuals that work there, all the way through to the family and all of that.
Absolutely. I think the average tenure now is something around 25 years. And we are kind of hitting now the first retirees from the baby boomer generation. But still, people stay with us for an incredibly long time, which is just great because it really allows you to develop projects long term rather than having to deal with short term projects because people leave, there is a lot of turnover.
And I guess one of the other things from North America's standpoint, the introduction that I've had to T+A, and I've asked our producer Dennis what he kind of knows about T+A. In North America, we kind of know T+A as more of an electronics manufacturer. We don't know as much about the speakers, and that is changing. But we don't know as much about the speakers, and we don't know a lot about the history of T+A and how it kind of all got started. When we were there maybe a month or so ago, maybe a little bit longer, one of the interesting things I believe you said was T+A is actually quite large. Like it's one of the largest, if not the largest speaker manufacturer in Germany, or that might have been the electronics. I don't quite remember the exact thing, but can you give a little bit of the Coal Notes version of T+A and kind of the products that started T+A to kind of where we are now?
We started in 1978, actually in a disused bake shop as a loudspeaker maker, because my father always had the dream of making electronics, but back then he didn't have the cash to pay for it. And speakers were and still are much more cost efficient to build. So for the first couple of years, we went all in building speakers, for example, the Criterion range that then became so successful, selling, I think, it's 11,000 pairs or speakers. I'm not entirely sure, but that actually helped pay for setting up an electronics R&D team that came up with our first AudioCon series that then evolved into our R series in the 1990s. And all of those product ranges are in some form or other still with us. For example, the Criterion speakers used to be with us until last year. Now there is something happening in the near future with that. The Solitaire speakers are still with us, just like the R series. And now we really have the company set up to be in German, we call it full range. I don't know if there is an English equivalent to that, but we have loudspeakers, which we are focusing very much on as of the last 2 years. We have headphones, which we introduced in 2020, actually, and of course, electronics. And I don't think we will ever achieve parity because right now electronics are still the leading source of revenue for T+A, but of course, we would like it to be as even as possible, meaning that, of course, we would love our loudspeakers and headphone portfolios to grow and in the end contribute maybe as much as electronics do.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And what was really interesting to me, and you kind of talked about it a little bit, headphones. So maybe I'll take a step back because I know a little bit more about this story. When you started at T+A, headphones weren't a thing. And my understanding behind this is you made a few very strong cases for why you believed headphones should become part of T+A's product offering. I'd love to hear a little bit about your thoughts on that and maybe even kind of the people that you see using speakers versus headphones and kind of why you believed that push into headphones was so important.
The move into headphones had two rationales. One was that I saw the majority of my peer group, and that's anecdotal evidence, but it was a lot of people who, whenever they wanted to get better sound, they bought better headphones rather than invest in speakers. And I think that is a consequence of my generation growing up with the iPod, the Sony Walkman, where headphones were just ubiquitous. You had them wherever you were, so you're just used to them to enjoy music. And that is the business case for why I thought that it would make sense to go into headphones, because younger people are much more used to it. That was the immediate rationale. And the long-term plan was that we hoped to make products that people can actually wear outside, because a hi-fi brand, if you don't have travel headphones, it's a very home-centric product usually. So not a lot of people see it. But if you wear headphones, for example, on an airplane, it can be kind of like a watch thing where you can wear it wherever you are. And I think that opens up a whole new clientele. So that was the long-term play when we started developing our first home use headphones, because that was the long-term plan, to start with home use headphones. And then if that works out, go to travel headphones.
The reception of kind of putting this forth as a plan, how did that go over with your father?
He was very open to it. He wasn't a huge headphone fan. So it wasn't that he said, when I walked in and said, "Hey, Dad, I think we got to do something about headphones." He didn't say, "I had the same thought last night, let's do it." He was not hesitant, but he understood the rationale. And as the case was made, we did some market research, which wasn't super conclusive. So it didn't come back with people saying, go for it. But he still took the risk, which I'm incredibly grateful for, because he believed that the case I made and that our team made as well. I can't take credit for it all alone, but it was a team of people. That the case we made sense. And so he was willing to take the risk and even make a product that might fail. And that was a realistic possibility in the beginning of 2020 when we were really launching those headphones. COVID hit. And so no one knew if this was either a really good idea to launch them now, or if the entire market is going to tank and it was the worst possible time to launch the headphones. And he was really willing to stick with it and to support me, because if you are the second generation coming into a company and the company is taking such a bet that they did because of you, it can be stressful, and there can be situations where you think, if this doesn't pan out, I have a huge problem. And so both my parents were just incredibly supportive and willing to see it through, because they had the experience to see that the business rationale behind it was actually sound.
Yeah.
And so his reaction was very helpful and positive.
So the naming convention of the headphones, they're solitaire. Both the headphones are solitaire. That shares the name from one of the speaker lines as well. Was there, did you want to kind of keep that naming convention to kind of keep people that may already know the T+A for the solitaire speakers to kind of make them more comfortable about the headphones? Or was there another rationale to kind of keep that naming convention as opposed to come up with an entirely new name for the headphone range?
Actually, it was a technical reason, because the first solitaire headphones were magnetostatic headphones, still are magnetostatic headphones.
Yeah.
And they are driven by a planar system. And our solitaire speakers had always been driven by electrostatic or other planar systems. And so that was the idea, to say, hey, actually, we're using a similar technology here, because the headphone driver may as well be a treble unit, for example, a tweeter.
Yeah.
And that was the idea, to say, hey, we're using a similar technology, and why not have our top-of-the-line headphone and the top-of-the-line speaker bear the same name?
Very cool. And then when it comes to the headphones, and and maybe this is actually proving your thought process here, I love loudspeakers. I love the hi-fi industry, all the different components and all that. But I have a special affinity to headphones because I do travel a fair bit. And a lot of the time when I'm in the home, I don't have the luxury of being able to throw on a pair of speakers all that loud. So I put on headphones and I sit down and enjoy. So I'll admit that as I kind of dig into the headphone stuff a little bit, because I am quite curious. You started with the Solitaire P headphones. So these guys are quite expensive. They're not cheap headphones. There's a reason why they're that expensive. They have technology that you don't see as often. So the planar magnetic. What was the idea between to start high in the market and then kind of go down in your next range to a more travel one, as opposed to starting with the travel? Like, why start with the in-home experience when somebody might already have a speaker system?
For us, there were two reasons. When we got into making headphones, we wanted to not minimize risk, but not take unnecessary risks. And given the planar technology of the solitaire Ps, we knew that we understood the basic technology of how the driver is supposed to work. And so there were less unknowns compared to a travel headphone, which also had to deal with a battery, ANC. How do you tune ANC? What happens to Bluetooth? How do you make sure that they sound great in passive mode? So those were all variables that we knew we would have had to deal with not having any experience in headphones. And when we went for the home use headphone, we knew that we understood the basic driver technology. So it now came down to tuning the headphone, understanding how the driver works in the headphone casing, but you didn't have as many variables compared to a closed back travel headset with a battery pack. And so at first we wanted to gain experience, understand how headphones work, and go on from there. And we always believed in introducing a top of the line product and working our way down from that rather than working up from an entry-level product. But that's just a thing that we do. I think you can go both ways. It very much depends on what you want to do as a brand.
And when it comes to the headphones, and you kind of already mentioned it, the next pair that you made was these travel headphones, these solitaire Ts. That is a huge step. So they're still in the higher price range. They're still in the kind of higher quality audiophile grade headphones, the way that I'll kind of frame it. But they do have a lot of unique stuff that I don't see in a lot of high-end headphones. But then they also have this huge range of technology for when you're on the go and you want it. So that jump between the Solitaire P, the first one, and the second one, when did you know you were ready to make that jump? When did you know that was something that you were going to be able to commit to?
Do you want to have an honest answer?
Yes.
It's usually when you start, without all the management spin that I could now put up to avoid answering the question. To be honest, there are always moments where you think this cannot possibly work. And why are we doing it? And that was when we had the idea for the Solitaire Ts. We didn't just want to make a travel headphone. We really said, let's start out making a home use headphone that also has the travel capabilities. Because we felt that was something that we would want to have. If I wanted to buy a headphone, I would love to have a one-stop solution where I can just have one headphone. And of course, that introduces layers of difficulty where you at times think, why did we think this was a good idea? But in the end, we have a very robust development process, and you can usually look to the progress you make, and that keeps you going on because you see we've tackled so many issues now. Let's tackle the other ones as well. And I think having that structure in place really helped us break the complexity down to manageable levels, so that the entire team isn't overwhelmed by all of a sudden, as you said, having a load of technology in front of them and basically 2 years' time and let's have at it. And I think that was credit to the entire R&D team, Lothar Wiemann and Jörg Küpper, who were our heads of R&D at the time, who really managed the process in a way that made it manageable for the entire team.
Has any of the technology or learnings or research and development that you've done for the headphones, has any of that made its way back into the electronics or the speakers? Is there any learnings, even in the process or the materials that have kind of transferred back into the more traditional T+A product line?
Yeah, some of which I'm not yet allowed to talk about, but others, yes. So, for example, our tweeters for the entry-level solitaire speakers, they are not a direct learning, but they're very similar to the tweeters we use in our solitaire headphones. And that was the basic idea, that we have one row of magnets and the diaphragm on the other side. And that was an idea that we transferred over when we started developing, for example, the speakers, that we said, why can't we make the headphone drivers just smaller and fit them into a speaker and use them as a tweeter?
Oh, interesting.
And that actually, we then blew that system up for the larger solitaire speakers with the 85 centimeter long tweeter, where we again said, let's just take the concept of the headphone drivers and make it much, much bigger. So there is a great cross-pollination, so to speak, of ideas between both loudspeakers and headphones, which I think is also a consequence of the same team working on both. We didn't separate them out when we made the decision to go into headphones, but we rather said, let's have a unit that works on electronics and let's have a team that works on, we call them in German transducers, but that encompasses loudspeakers and headphones. And so the cross-pollination of ideas is just much more natural because it's the same team working on it.
Thank you, Conradin. Right now, we're going to take a quick little musical break and we'll jump right back into things after the break. Welcome back. We're here with Conradin from T+A. Just before the break, we were talking about a little bit of the origin story of T+A, how the product range is looking, and how the headphones came to be. What I'm kind of curious about, Germany is renowned for their engineering. They're kind of looked to on the world stage as kind of the pinnacle of engineering and of these like very sleek designs. And I personally see that through the T+A product line. I'm curious to kind of hear, Conradin, what your opinions are on the Germanness of T+A, or if there's other influences and stuff like that.
That is a very good question, because I think in some aspects we are quintessentially German engineering. And in other aspects, we very much try to be very international. And I think a technology-first approach is very typical for German engineering. So that it's really about technology. It's not about coming up with something that is just a new spin on something that already exists, but actually going the extra mile to come up with new solutions. Part of the reason for T+A to exist is to actually do the development process, to come up with new solutions, to even take the risk to fail. And I think that is very much what German engineering is about, which, funny side story, also really helps us attract new young talents, especially in R&D, because there is such a strong culture of engineering that it's not hard for us to find new engineers. Now, in other aspects, we try to become a bit more international, especially on the business side, because the question always is, it's a great technology, but what about the business case? And I think that is somewhat of the flip side to German engineering, that maybe the business case is not discussed as much as it could be discussed. But I think that in the end, what's really quintessentially German is, for example, that we measure everything we do twice, so that we always make sure that the data's there, the facts are there. It's not just it sounds great, let's ship it out.
Maybe I should have started with this earlier, but I think everything that you just said kind of leads into what T+A actually stands for. So what does T+A actually mean? Maybe I should have started with that, but I'll ask that now. What does T+A actually mean?
Theory and application. My father founded the company having a graduate degree in physics because he really wanted to transfer the theory from his university education into the audio industry, to apply it to the audio industry. And that is what we are still driven by. We still have, for example, young students working on projects for their dissertations, but even as in internships where we don't know where they're going with it. It may well be that is a huge breakthrough, or it could just be that we say, well, it was a nice time, we learned a lot, but that's not an idea we can bring to market. And I think that is also part of German engineering that's not as commonly known, because I think German engineering is very much known for being very precise, very accurate, almost like the Swiss, so to speak, in terms of measuring things, making sure everything fits. But I think it's also the willingness to give young people a shot, to let them experiment, to let them come up with new technologies and ideas.
How has, I guess, the market, both in Germany and kind of externally, how has the market changed the approach that T+A has had over the generations?
I think that we saw a couple of shifts in the market. One was a shift that we ourselves introduced all the way back in 2007 when we introduced our first streamers, where people even said that my father now finally lost his marbles, because how can you ever think that something music streamed over the internet can ever be higher quality than a CD? And that was a shift where we, back then, I say we, but the team back then took the huge gamble that over time the internet will become so important that you actually it will eclipse the CD as the primary means of listening to music. That was a shift all the way back in 2007 that we initiated ourselves. And what we are seeing now and what we've responded to with, for example, our new PSD and R2500 units is a shift more towards mobile devices, where it's no longer that the unit itself is streaming the music from the internet, but that it's very phone-centric. And so that you need to open up your electronics to the user's phone, to the music they have stored on their phone. And we think that trend will continue and even accelerate down the line. So for us now, it's basically a strategy to, on the one hand, of course, include the latest streaming services, the latest technologies, but also to open our devices up so that the customers in the long run can choose what they play, for example, from their phone.
With everything becoming more phone-centric, you guys are kind of making that push into headphones and doing very well with it. Do you see the kind of electronics and the speakers as a declining market over the next? I know it's impossible to predict the future, but do you imagine that people are going to be even less interested in speakers and electronics over the next few decades, or are they mutually exclusive? Maybe that's the better way of putting it.
I don't necessarily think they are. I think that if we, and by we I now mean the entire industry, if we adopt those trends and come up with, for example, electronics or speaker products that, for example, can be connected to phones very easily, I don't think there will be a decline necessarily. I think that the perception of the devices itself will shift. Maybe you do not need electronics anymore, but they just look great. And so the reason for buying them may change. I think with headphones, it very much depends on the living situations, at least in home use. And that's why it's very hard to make predictions there, because you don't know how living situations, for example, do people have lots of space? Does the average size of the flat increase or decrease? I think all of that factors in if they buy electronics, if they buy speakers, if they buy headphones. So I think all we can do as an industry is to come up with the products that fit the needs of the next generation. So easily connectable to a phone, app interface that works well. All of those things that even if you have all your music on a phone, it's still fun to use the device. Then I think we will flourish.
Is there a specific technology or specific product ranges or things that T+A is exploring now that might be either surprising to people or might give a glimpse of where you can imagine the next product range coming from?
Yes, actually there is, because we've reorganized the way we develop our electronics, because in the past we've always focused on the kind of core technologies, but the usability came second to that. So it was core product, as we call it, core product first, and then find a way how to interact with it. But what we've seen new customers demand is that a product has to be great to use. And that's why we've set up our own team in R&D that focuses solely on user experience, user interfaces, which we haven't done in the past. And I'm actually super excited because those guys and girls are really taking a kind of scientific approach to usability. And if those products work out the way we think they will be something completely different to what we've done before. And I'm really excited to see what they're coming up with.
And this kind of maybe is an aside, but there's a resurgence of technology like, CDs, but the one that blows me away is cassette tapes. Vinyl still has a pretty large resurgence. T+A in the past has made cassette CD players. I think you might still have a turntable. I don't know if you still have a turntable. Yeah. Would you ever go back and kind of expand upon those previous technologies, like something like cassette tapes? Mm-hmm. Do you see any value in going back and adding that technology back into new products?
I am not sure. In general, I'm very open to doing it, because in the end, we're selling emotions. And so if people enjoy putting in their cassette into the cassette deck, it's a great product. And so I'd never rule out most things, going back to cassettes, for example. I'm just not sure when it comes to, for example, cassettes, if it's really a trend, or if it is a very salient minority that is maybe not representative of the industry. But in general, no, I'd never rule that out.
Yeah, I kind of look at some of these things, and in some of them I see, like, I understand vinyl and kind of the art of vinyl and the idea of sitting down and listening and kind of flipping it over and all the kind of emotions that come with it. Cassettes in particular, for me, I just don't see it. So I'm always curious to see how the industry looks at it.
It's interesting. I personally think using cassettes, and I've grown up with them, it was always a huge hassle. But I can understand why people would start using them again, because it kind of gives you a great feeling of doing things that you did as a child. And so I think the technological value isn't there, but the emotional value is, which may be that you could even, and I've sold all my cassettes that I've had as a child. I think when I turned 20 and moved into my flat during university, I sold everything. But I can now see why people would maybe rediscover the moments they had when they listened to those cassettes, being maybe 15 and heartbroken, whatever. And I think that's incredibly powerful for us as well, that listeners form an emotional bond to music, because I think you can always, or at least I have a song for every station in my life. I could name a song that I listened to at that time. And I think bringing back those memories through cassettes can be very, very powerful.
You kind of led into typically the last question that I ask, which is, let's say me and you are going on a road trip and you had to put on a song or an album or kind of a collection of artists that you absolutely love and you're like, I need you to listen to this. What would be your go-to song? Or what is the soundtrack to your life at this moment, or something that is stood the test of time for you in terms of your audio taste?
That's incredibly difficult. There are a couple of songs that I listen to not as frequently because I don't want to. There is a German term, to overhear something, that you listen to it so often that you just get sick of it.
Yeah.
And I don't want that to happen to those songs. But one of the songs that's really close to my heart it's by John Williams, Star Wars Episode 2. It's called Across the Stars. That's it, Across the Stars. And I listened to it quite frequently, but then we did for the solitaire piece, we did the we tested them. And I listened to them for the first time in really high-res quality on the HA200 with those headphones. And all of a sudden, it just hit me on a visceral level how not only beautifully recorded it was, but how well thought out it was. Because if you know the story of Star Wars, and I think you do.
Yeah, I'm a super Star Wars nerd.
Perfect. We can geek out now. But the thing is that just what I found fascinating was how that one song in 5 minutes time basically told the story of Anakin Skywalker, and it just managed to tell that in the context of this love story, and that was just it still gives me goosebumps talking about it now.
Oh, that's amazing. We could geek out after this, but that's awesome. I love that. With that, thank you so much, Conradin, for joining us today. I really appreciate it, and I'm very excited to see what T+A has in store for the future.
John, thanks very much. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you for having me on, and stay tuned for what we will introduce.
Awesome. Take care, everyone.